I think the reality is that the world's not exactly beginning this potentially global conflict from a very strong position, right? We had not only was COVID a problem, but the global economy was already weakening in 2019. And so there was evidence that 2020 was going to be a pretty weak year all on its own. So you ended up with even a far worse situation than that. And so looking at the larger global context, right, you're already in a situation where there's global economic weakness. You're, in terms of the specific current conflict, the U.S. is not really all that heavily invested, as you noted, with Russia. German ties with Russia are far greater, and not just in terms of natural gas and energy, but just larger overall. And I think we started to see a rift there between U.S. policy and Germany in terms of Germany took a much more even-handed view towards China and Russia in terms of what sort of trade ties should we have. But in terms of overall U.S. trade with Russia is pretty weak. But looking at what could the results of the current embargoes and policy and the war be, there seems to be a certain narrative that's come out from this, I think really just hopping on the back of those general feelings of malaise, the fact that we could sense that the West was already in a position of weakness. We could sense that the dollar was under pressure because there had just been so much money printing, if you will, going on over the last couple of years, so that the Congress could spend an extra $3, $4, $5, $6 trillion. And so that led many people to reasonably conclude that this puts the dollar in a very weak position. But I think if we look overall at the general context here, the dollar isn't necessarily in the worst position. So when we look at the dollar, when we look at issues of, say, we cast out Russia from the Western economy, which may or may not really be something the U.S. can accomplish, what does that mean? Does that create this global bloc between Russia and China that can really rival the West? I don't know about that. And just really, where does this leave the economy overall in terms of economic growth? And I think looking at those three issues then, I think we could say that, yeah, it definitely weakens global growth overall, starting trade embargoes, cutting off international flows of goods and services. That's obviously problematic in terms of global economic growth, as well as devoting huge sums of money and resources to war making instead of doing things that actually increase people's standard of living. So, okay, that's a problem. The second one is the whole, well, let's force China and Russia to start their own bloc. I'm not sure how successful that will be. As you pointed out in your column yesterday, and I also noted in my column this morning because it's just so interesting, is the fact that, well, not all countries are really going to play along with the idea of the U.S. embargo of Russia. You've got countries like Mexico, Brazil, India, and certainly China, who are a little bit more reluctant to engage in some sort of embargo there. So whether or not that works is one issue. And then the other issue is, well, how big is this bloc? Will this start attracting the rest of the world to the Russia-China bloc and isolating the U.S.? And I see no evidence of that whatsoever. Even if we took Russia and China, put them together and looked at them as a percentage of global GDP, you're looking at maybe 1/5, 20%-ish, combining Russia's and China's. And of course, Russia's GDP is so small. It's just a small percentage of China's and the U.S.'s. But let's put them together. We come up with about 20% of global GDP. If you take the U.S. and you take Europe and you take Japan together, that's more, it's about a third of global GDP. So it seems that the U.S. could certainly survive in this Western bloc, or with its sphere of influence, Asian countries all continuing as usual with their own economy. And then there's the issue of the dollar. Right? Where, will this cause the collapse of the dollar because foreign countries will then abandon their reserves of dollars, and then you're cutting off a significant fraction of the global economy from using the dollar. The dollar's not really in the worst position there when you look at the euro and you look at other potential rival currencies. So all of this together, at least in the short term, I mean, anything could happen in the medium or long term. But I'm just not seeing a clear situation where this sinks the U.S. in terms of its economic power, its soft power. It seems those things are still well secured as far as the U.S. regime goes. Now, I wish things would happen that would humble the U.S. regime, but the rest of the world's regimes are so poorly run, as you would expect, it makes the U.S. look almost reasonable by comparison.